So, well, I mentioned and brought it up in the video going over my plans for, when I hit 3,000 subscribers. And what I wanted to do, originally I was going to do like a big fairy tale reread. And I was like, yeah, it doesn't make too much sense for my channel because it's not just the fairy tale stuff. Obviously, people really like my Black Clover stuff too. So I'm going to do both. And here we have it. I'm going to begin with the Black Clover reread as well. We're going to do chapter 1. We'll do after this, we'll do stuff like the introduction of the Black Bulls and the first stuff in Saucy Village. And then we'll do the dungeon archive. We'll do character analysis videos as we go. It'll be like generally if we pass a point where a character isn't really gonna be too much of a like a piece in the story anymore, so we can kind of just talk about what they brought and what they presented. Obviously, I'm not gonna read like, hey, Saucy Village, like, let's talk about Magna already. It's like, that's going to be for way later. Magna will probably be like somebody we talk about right before he comes back for his return post-time skip. But, as it were, now we're going to talk about Chapter 1. We're going to talk about the very first chapter, Black Clover, and just how it was at the beginning, initial thoughts, as well as... because, like I said, I want to try and get as much as at least I could remember my first thoughts, like, that I had when reading this series, as well as stuff that we know now, 250 chapters later, looking back at the series. Like, for instance, like the chapter, like the infamous, famous and infamous to some, opening when it shows the big demon that Lumiere, who we, the first Wizard King, but we can just call him Lumiere, went and fought against. We know all the stuff now between him and Licht. It's really funny because in the anime, when it came to anime-only people, there was always that thing of like, oh man, we see this opening every single time. Why do they gotta show us every time? It's because it was getting that into your head, so you always thought about this as, the big hero versus the big villain at one point, the big monster, and then you didn't expect what was coming with all the stuff with, like, with Patri and, or not Patri, with Patri's not actually being licked and who actually was licked and what happened between Licht and Lumiere. Just as like that shock value right there. I thought that was really good. I thought that was a really good way to add, to put your mind somewhere else when you were getting up to that point. But like, then we open up and it's got, you got Julius returning with some captains. I'm still wondering, like, what happened at the start of the series that was such a big enough threat? You had to send, not only you had to send Julius, but also looks of Charlotte, Fuegoleon, and who looks to be Jack. This guy's like got like a cloak on. Like a cape. I don't know. It doesn't look like it was much early. And then it's funny because early they don't have their magic knight robes for each of their squads, but it was the start of the series, so it's not like Tabata had everything hammered out immediately. Like, I bet he had chapter 1 finished long before he like got to the idea of like, oh yeah, let's have robes with all of them and stuff. Just one of those things. Like, he had to have this all like way further kind of like began out before Black Clover chapter 1 actually dropped. But we see the the skeleton, and who we later find out is the the actual Lumiere, just as a statue. And opening to Asta talking to Sister Lily. Still funny how he's trying really hard, like even in the beginning, just to put that high energy at trying to convince her to marry him. And it's just even that note at the start of like saying like, hey, you know that she's a nun, she can't marry you. Also, you're 15, or like, what are you doing? And just as like something that's just always interesting to look at is Asta was small at the start of the series. Like, he had that setup kind of like Rock Lee, where he was really strong. Like, he was super strong in terms of a human, but he was, you wouldn't be able to tell it just by looking at his actual frame. Like, now he's big. Like, Asta's a thick boy. He's got a lot of muscles packed on, and like there's a good amount of growth between then and now. And like there's been a lot of like buff main characters recently, like when it comes to like the newer gen shonen. But like even the rival for Black Clover, My Hero, like Deku becomes pretty fit, like short after the start of the series, because he's got to for his power. But like, I'm trying to think of like when the first time that I can at least remember we saw Asta where I was like, man, he's really shredded, I think was at least the first time was back when like they've just finished the Witch's Forest. I think it was like right then, and Mars and Asta were just, you know, parting ways. And Asta had his shirt off for a bit at that point, but that was the first time, like, I think I really looked, like, saw Asta and be like, damn, dude, he's built. Like, he's putting a lot of meat, like, a lot of muscle, like, since then. Like, I'm actually looking forward. I'm gonna take note of that, like, going through the reread, up until, like, when I can see, like, the point of, like, oh, here's when Asta just kind of went from lean, super strong Rock Lee type to just being jacked. And I know it's before that, but I've never looked for that part when reading through Black Clover. So I'm looking forward to just, like, every chapter, like, is this what happens? Is this where Asta just kind of gains, like, 50% muscle mass? But, as it were, you know, we have Asta just kind of, like, doing his thing. We know how he was at the early with Sister Lily, trying to, you know, get on her, well, physically and I guess romantically, but also in reality. But Asta just, like, talking to him, trying to work his charm. Just going at Yuno, yelling at Yuno early on, like, they're just, like, the basic ways of, like, how their, you know, how their dynamic work, and how exactly, like, their interactions were going to be for the rest of the series. But I actually interested in seeing Nash, because Nash, we know, at the start of the anime arc that's going on right now that Tabata designed up, is that he's also training to become, you know, powerful, to be Magic Knight. And he's, like, he's doing all of Asta's training, which includes, like, that stuff that's supposed to, like, make your magic stronger. And I'm wondering if, like, the physical training and then just also, like, training in general, like, with his magic, he's going to come out, like, a lot more powerful. And it's because he used, like, this Asta method of trying to get stronger that actually put him in at, like, a considerable level whenever, you know, he's at an age to compete. A couple years within the storyline. I'm hoping his magic, because I don't think it's directly called fire magic in the chapter, but it looks like it. I'm hoping that it's going to turn out not to actually be fire magic, because if he just has fire magic when we get to, like, him in, like, the series, if Tabata ever decides to be like, oh yeah, I want to actually have him as a character and join one of the Magic Knight groups, and maybe even get a fight later on. If he has fire magic, then I don't have, like, a lot of hope for him. Unless he straight up becomes, like, a fire swordsman, like, combines that physical strength into it. Or just, like, maybe, like, it doesn't have to be a sword. Like, he gets, like, armor and stuff and becomes kind of, like, the idea of, like, a Magic Knight. Like, an actual physical Magic Knight. I think that would be really cool. But other than that, like, if he's got fire, then I don't know. That'll be the thing that kind of, like, pulls away a bit of my hype. Just because we've got a lot of fire mages already in Black Clover. We've got a good amount of them, and that includes a bunch of them that aren't really worth, like, really paying attention to, because fire's a pretty standard element, and you got to have that kind of, like, peering away from the standard. I mean, you got Fuegoleon and Marileon as the obvious ones, and then, you know, now we have Leopold, who's got his own thing finally after so long, where he's not in that same, like, generic fire mage. Like, okay, cool, he's got AoE, he's got an AoE-ness thing, he's gonna set up all this big environmental effects so he can track his opponents down and attack them. He's got his own perk, his own gimmick. And Nash, unless he does something like that, where he can combine, like, his physical strength and, like, his ability as a wizard, I don't really see him being anything other than a background character that can be like, oh, cool, look, he's grown, he's gotten to where he's at now. But there was a nice bit when Asta runs off to go train, and you have that little mini flashback in Sister Lily's head, thinking about, like, how Yuno used to be, like, a big crybaby, and it was at the day that Asta and him returned, and Asta was all beat up, that Yuno hasn't cried since then, and since then Asta always returns all beat up and dirty, because then we see that's what, that was a big defining moment with their characters. Like, we get that flashback later in the chapter of, you know, when Asta came to help Yuno, who was being accosted by some, you know, just some dude in the streets who was, like, stealing his necklace, and Asta just, you know, kept taking a beating in order to help his friend out, not even just his friend, help his brother. And just that as, like, a big character moment, that big driving point, like, that started out their journey. It's such a simple and yet effective way to really do it. You know, you have two children. You have one kid who just feels powerless, and he's having something, probably the only precious things in his life being taken from him, and he feels weak. He feels unable to do anything. He feels powerless. And then somebody like Asta, who, even as a kid, I can imagine, like, Asta still would come, you know, he still comes off as that high energy kind of spaz character. and just the amount of effort he's putting in order to help, you know, and to really kind of be like, if he's able to be this strong, so should I. And at the same time, also be like, I need to be stronger in order to do better next time. Just getting them to the start of their journeys of what, you know, led down their oath to race to become Wizard King and whatnot. And I really like that early chapter aspect, and I know it's, they're like my big popular series on my channel for Fairy Tail and Black Clover. But for real, I do really, really enjoy them. And this first chapter, just reading through both of them, especially like when you have like the hindsight of being so much far, like years and years ahead of when, you know, the first chapter initially came out, and you're able to look at it for really what really works for it, and what you know, what is just what's laid out for stuff in the future, but at the same time also just what is like a really good factor of that first chapter. And I really like stuff like that where you're getting hints at you know, the really big character driving the events in their storyline. Then they go and get their grimoires. I actually didn't notice this until I reread this, and it's such a small thing that doesn't really matter, but I think it's important for the world building. Is the old guy who's, you know, talking to all these kids with you know, as they're getting their grimoires, he says that he is, you know, he's the master of that mage tower, of that grimoire tower, and he's like, we haven't had a Wizard King come from this area before, and we've never even really had somebody achieve greatness by joining the Magic Knights. I never noticed that this is just the Grimoire Tower of this area. There's more. I never really thought about it that much, of like, well, then why is you know, get characters like Zora and Noelle and stuff and whatnot not here and present. But it's like, oh no, it's like just because they were not they weren't at this spot when they got their grimoires. They were at a completely different area. I just think that's really a really cool thing to think about. I never thought about that when it came to the series, and it's not like a big plot piece. I think it's more important of just like when you're thinking about the world, because now this area, now I'm thinking about it, when this area where these guys are all coming from, the guy says like they've never had a Wizard King from this area, and they've never really had anybody from this region who's joined the Magic Knights. Now they have two people who both joined, and we think about like this whole region, when you have like your idea of like the pride of this area, like these peasants and these hardworking salt of the earth guys, that they've never had like big people come out of their land, and now they have, like, even in present day, I'm trying to think of a year. Oh my god, I think it's a year. It's either a year or 6 months between now and the star awarding ceremony. I think it's 6 months. I mean, we're at least a year now, so, you know, 16, somewhere around 16, 17 age range for Austin, you know. But in such a short span of time, they have two big up-and-coming characters. And even when you think about, not thinking about, like, Austin, you know, in the spot of end game of where they're going to be at, when you think about just where they're at now, they're both pretty big and like, you know, pretty impactful guys when it comes to, like, just what the public would know. Not from what the readers would know. Just from what the public would know of, like, key characters that help fight back with the elves and stuff, and, you know, the Eye of the Midnight Sun and all that. I think that's just really cool to think about, because there's a lot of small character, just bits that you don't really kind of like grasp when you're going through. And something like that, where it's like, yeah, it's not ever really emphasized. It's not something that it's like a big factor of the series when it's like, oh, when you become Wizard King, we're finally going to have like a big person to talk about from our region as like making it big. That's never been a thing for Black Clover. It's never been emphasized on their goals and their aspirations having like impact on where they're from. But it is cool to think about it from the perspective of those people. I think that like one thing to really kind of like, it's just, is like on a level to mess with my head when you really consider it. It's like the new Eden Zero chapter, but because the main character, if you don't read Eden Zero, he uses gravity manipulation, and so he can mess with gravity in order to like cling to walls and, you know, like pretty much fly around. There's a part when a guy's like, oh, you clung to the ceiling because he dodged an attack and he just kind of like jumped and messed with gravity, so he just, you know, his feet are stuck to the ceiling. And I always thought of it more of like in the idea of like flight, when you're just kind of like defying gravity, and it's like nothing really feels like you're, you know, in one spot, because when you kind of have like the idea of gravity, it's kind of like coming down on you at all times, and anytime you go up, it's going to push you back down. And then with like, if you have flight and where gravity doesn't really matter, it's more of just like you can just float around in the zone at any point. You have free range. Gravity is not a thing for you. All area is your land. But with gravity manipulation, it's like he's like says that he didn't cling to the ceiling, he fell onto the ceiling. So from his perspective, because it's gravity, it's more of like if gravity shifted and all of a sudden you just kind of like fell to the ceiling and the floor would just be the ceiling to you at that point. It's entirely just more of like the perspective, and it's weird to think about. And I do really like just stuff like that where it opens up like something that's always been existent in the series but you never really thought about. I just think that's really cool, and like just a really cool world aspect, I think, and not like the planet, just like the storytelling world of the series in general. So it's gonna be really cool when you go back and read like this first chapter like way later in the series, and just like seeing like even before they become Wizard King and stuff, just like when Yuno and Asa become captains, and you have like, we've never even had people become Magic Knights, and that's like a couple years later you have 2 of them as captains, and then eventually they're gonna move even further beyond that. It's gonna be really cool. But then you have like the actual grimoires going out. Obviously Asta does not get his, or it's like, oh, better luck next year. People are making fun of Asta, and you get the first bit about getting the 4-leaf grimoire, and how the first ever Wizard King had that. Isn't that amazing? That's the one that's supposed to be with good luck. And all these guys are like cheering for and stuff. And I never really thought as well about the perspective of the other characters, just like random no-name fodder guys, because these are like, from their perspective, these random guys, they have their grimoires, but they don't make it to the Magic Knights. Who knows like how many of them we never get noted. I don't think like, oh, we made this many got in, including Austin Yuno. As far as we know, it was just Austin Yuno, at least as far as I can remember. Maybe it was stated 10 people got in or something. It's crazy for us. But when you think about from their perspective, like, making it in is like completely understandable. Like, if you were in this spot, you're just some peasant who got his grimoire, you're not very powerful with magic, you're not good enough to be in the Magic Knights. Even if you aren't sure of that yet, you're still going to try. You'd be like, oh, this guy's going to get in for sure. This guy's got a 4-leaf grimoire. This guy's clearly a big deal. And then you see Asta, and here's this guy who's this short, dude who's just loud, and he doesn't get a grimoire. He doesn't look like he can use magic at all, and he's like talking about being this guy's rival and stuff. You'd be like, who the hell is this guy? What is wrong with this dude? Why is he? He's ridiculous. He's a clown. And then, even a couple months later, and then I guess more than a couple months. Actually, yeah, thinking about it, because it's 6. I was like trying to figure out of the time span of like earlier. I was trying to think of the time span, but it's 6 months from chapter 1 until they try out for the Magic Knights, and then 6 months after joining the Magic Knights to the Star Award ceremony. So it's a year between Asta getting his grimoire and where it was that point in the story. Okay, I remember. I forget that because it's such an early time skip of 6 months, like after the first chapter, that I just forget about it every time. It's legitimately one of those things, because it's not like a big important story piece that, oh yeah, it's 6 months later, other than like, oh yeah, he trained, he got a little stronger. And there's a little bit in there, like you find out with Fonza later that Asta, Asta learned a little bit of swordsmanship from him. But Asta just, he's not letting all this get him down. He's like, all right, I'm going to try. I'm going to get better. I got to do this. And then gets attacked by Revchi, who uses his chains to bind him. He wants to get his grimoire. And I talked about in the Fairy Tale Chapter 1 video for my reread project that I want to do a video on Revchi and Bora, so I didn't want to talk too much about them individually in the chapters, because, Revchi has, like, I use existent in the series very loosely right now, because he's kind of there, but it's not really. But as far as we know, he's just kind of there for a comedic kind of joke with Goldry. I don't even know if he's going to end up being, like, having any value later. So I'll talk about him as, like, his presence in the first chapter, because he does have, like, a lot of craziness that is worth talking about in, like, the idea of the Black Clover world. And I won't go too much into it, but we will discuss it in his own video. So after that point, we see Asa start to kind of like thinking about giving up. Like he's like, oh, as with your magic or with my magic chains, I can see somebody's magic, which honestly is a pretty good trait when you think about it. Even in today's like setup for Black Clover, if you can bind somebody and cut off their ability to use magic while also being able to analyze them, you could probably, oh, sorry to hiccup, brother. You could probably like do some pretty like high-end like human trafficking stuff, because you'd be able to know who's powerful, who's worth like doing certain things. And then if he like joined the Eye of the Midnight Sun, like he would have been like, oh yeah, drain this person, this guy's high magic, drain this guy, and it'd be easy capturing powerful people if you could lock out their magic and stuff. But him telling Asta he's got no magic, Asta starting to kind of like lose faith in himself, and this is one of the things I think was Black Clover's like big early chapter or chapter 1 things. Like if you only like if all the big series like the existence of them were erased and only chapter 1 of each of them came out, this would be one of the big things for Black Clover, just to really note. Like if I just read Black Clover chapter 1, all of a sudden it's the first time I've ever reading it, I would note that like what I already mentioned earlier, the flashback and how I thought the flashback was important, but how like it was kind of very misdirected, that like thought of Asta as like, oh, just pathetic, this is utter nonsense, but it was more of like, oh, it was hinted at being Asta being his rival. It's like, there's no way you could be my rival, but it actually was when he didn't believe there was any way that Asta couldn't get a grimoire, because when the 5-leaf grimoire shows up, that's where it's kind of been like really kind of laid out, where it's like, oh no, Asta not getting chosen, I was right, there was no way that could happen. And it's how really respects Asta as his rival, and really just kind of has like a lot of respect in him and who he is. Because really, Asta, like, has more respect in Asta than Asta has in himself. And that's something that I've said a lot when it comes to like an easy way to explain their rivalry. But it's really true, because one of the things that drives is just Asta's personality and just like how he is to compete against. And it's such a nice driving force when you have that character who, even though he's like a prodigy, he still has to try and he has to work hard, and his motivation from that is really this guy who doesn't have what he has, but is able to keep up by how much effort he just puts into his everyday life. And that's something that with Asta that I've always gone over for anybody who's like tries to be like, oh, of course he got a main character power. I mean, they all do. They're the main characters. Even characters who don't have a very like a good power at the start, like Luffy, it's like, yeah, but then he finds a way. It gets developed into a really OP main character power. I mean, even at the start, it was pretty good because like brute force and bullets don't work on him and stuff. But I mean, not brute force, like plain physical, like crushing and stuff. It's not the same to him because it's rubber body, but you know what I mean. They're the main characters. They're gonna have main character powers. There's a reason that you're viewing the story from these characters' perspectives. But just, I think Asta, though, you could have given him really any magic, and he would have worked his ass off with it and become powerful. I mean, the anti-magic is a really interesting way to have taken his character, but you could have given Asta any magic and put him in that same spot, and he would have still worked really hard, because his personality and his mindset was already existent before he got the grimoire. I mean, I'm not trying to take a shot at Deku. But Deku, like, he needed the encouragement of his hero, in order to push him forward. Like, he was ready to give up and just become a normal guy. But, I mean, if you gave him, I don't know if you gave it, I don't think it was the power that really made him. It was the motivation. It was the, who he had, backing him up, saying, like, you can do it. You just have to, you have to believe in yourself. You got to try hard. You can't give up. You have to keep taking steps forward. With Asta, I think Asta would have, like I said, he just given him any power and he would have kept going at it. His is more of he needed his rival in order to, pretty much be like, hey, chin up, dude. Get back on your feet. You're still in this. Don't give up. And not even in like a direct way. It was more of just like, reinstilling that that belief in him. Because I imagine in Asta's mind, just from the idea of not really believing in him, probably did a lot more damage than any of the people making fun of him or anything. And it probably really messed with him in his head of being like, I mean, he doesn't even say anything of me, but that wasn't the case. I think when Asta had that just resurgence of energy from saying that he saw him as a rival is what really just got him up, and got his grimoire. And people still theorize that it's his overcoming despair that got the grimoire to chose him, which I still think is a really cool idea. But then he got the 5-leaf grimoire, and you see the big iconic fist bump that the series like has like a lot of respect rotating around. It's this big iconic scene. They redid it recently in the anime, and it's just a nice callback to when they were kids to where they're at now. Especially, I always really like that. And what's funny is like, when I mentioned earlier, I wanted to talk as much as I can about like the idea of like when I first read the chapters and like my initial thoughts, like it's as much as like I can remember of the first time I was reading them. And for Black Clover, like I went over a lot of stuff with Fairy Tail, and with Black Clover, funny enough, because up until like legitimately, because I love Black Clover, so I can say this without coming off insulting. Up until like, because we know that there's a ton more stuff that comes later, like with the first page having stuff with Lumira and Licht. If you didn't know what happens later, then that page would just come off as pretty generic, but we know it was turned in a way that completely undo that being just a generic guy fights big monster. It was done in a much more unique way. But up until like Asta, I think up until like admitting that Asta was his rival, like the series, like the first chapter, like there's stuff to look at, but if you're going in blind and you don't know about stuff later, it's just a pretty straightforward chapter. You know, there was nothing that I thought too crazy about it. I was just reading them like, okay, the main character seems kind of cool. I like the designs, I like the art, and like and I was like, okay, here's chapter 1 bad guy. He's gonna do his thing, and just going through the standard motions and stuff, setting up chapter 1. But in that first part, I think it's when Yuna said that he saw Asa's rival. And was like, oh, he's not like a Sasuke guy. He respects his rival. I thought that was really cool. That was one of the first thing that really made me go, hey, this series is doing pretty, doing some things for him. I'm very interested. And then the other thing that really just made me go, okay, for this alone, I'm gonna get into the series. Is this panel? I mean, this panel alone is really cool, but Asta using anti-magic, because like I did mention in this video, main character power. The main character's power in chapter 1, I would say, is important to me, just in the idea of getting that first chapter hook, because who knows, like if a series is going to be a really good way later on the line, but the initial premise needs to get you to go, okay, I'm interested, I want to check this out. I like Natsu, the fire dragon slaying. That's just cool in general. He's got dragon magic, badass. Asta having anti-magic and an anti-magic sword, I was like, okay, I can get behind this. This is pretty neat. I thought that was really cool. And to me, like when it comes to just like when you're getting into chapter 1, the series just comes out, I think the main character's power is honestly like a really important thing, just because it's going to be one of those things that make or break like in people's interest in the first chapter. Is what is this character's power going to be? I mean, it may sound weird, but it's true. But it was a really good first chapter. I really liked the first chapter of Black Clover. I think it's got a pretty standard startup with the first chunk of chapters. I think where Black Clover really picks up is when we get to the dungeon arc. I think the dungeon arc is where it really kind of gets off of the kind of like standard shonen, like here's all the basics we're gonna get you interested in, and kind of lay out there. And I think after that point is where Black Clover really started to forge itself into its own thing. But anyway, other than that, comment below. Tell me your thoughts about this. Did you share any similar opinions of the Black Clover first chapter? And what your experiences were when you first read it. But other than that, though, comment below. Tell me your thoughts are about this. And tell me your thoughts are on, the Black Clover, and I guess in general, and I guess this project. I'm gonna have a lot of fun going through early Black Clover and Fairy Tail stuff. I think it's gonna be a lot of fun. But other than that, though, comment below. Thumbs up the video for the like button, subscribe button, and check out my other videos. But other than that, I appreciate everybody's already subscribed. Thank you all for listening. Bye.